Never before have a handful of tech designers had such control over the way billions of us think, act, and live our lives. From the creators of Chasing Ice and Chasing Coal, the Emmy award-winning Netflix film The Social Dilemma blends documentary investigation and narrative drama to disrupt the disruptors, unveiling the hidden machinations behind everyone's favourite social media and search platforms. So we can now join the filmmaker and writer of The Social Dilemma, Vickie Curtis, in an exclusive interview with Tomorrow Unlocked's Rainer Bock.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Rainer from Tomorrow Unlocked, and very happy to be here today with all of you and our very special guest, Vickie Curtis. Vickie is a filmmaker, writer, and a story architect, which I find a very interesting job title. She elevates nonfiction film with the same strong characters and narrative arc that makes great fiction so compelling. And she's a theater nerd, she says about herself. She worked on different films as Frame by Frame, or the Emmy-winning Netflix original film Chasing Coral, or recently Anbessa. That film took a look at difficult aspects of modernity, and the same is true for The Social Dilemma, an outstandingly successful film about the threats of social networking, for which she was one of the main writers, and which is the basis for our discussion today. Very welcome, Vickie.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with a very simple opener. What is your favorite social network?
Before I worked on this film and sort of unpacked the what was going on behind the screen, I was very interested in, I would scroll on Instagram all the time. That was sort of my Achilles heel out of the platforms. I was an Instagram user, and I did have that experience of where my lizard brain was the one dictating the habit rather than my prefrontal cortex dictating the habit, where I would find myself, my thumb would just be clicking on that app before I even realized it was happening. So I am happy to say that I have signed off of Facebook and Instagram, and I haven't really missed them. And I never used Twitter, and I've never really used Snapchat and TikTok either. So I'm now sort of doing a low diet of those things, and or a no diet of those things, and I really haven't missed them.
You're also not sneaking into it for work, like finding stories, finding inspiration, finding people also?
I really not on Instagram at all. I have signed back into Facebook, here and there if I needed to look up a person, but I was able to be a lot more conscious about not scrolling. And I think, and really, that might happen once every 2 or 3 months compared to my previous usage. I had Facebook back when it was a thing that was just for a small group of colleges, and it has changed so much since then. It used to just be a place I felt like I could connect with other people at my school and other high school friends that were in college now, and so I've had it since those early days, but you got to sort of see it go through all these iterations and change from being a tool that was for me to use into this monetized platform that was using me.
You talked a bit about scrolling now, and one of the topics in the film, obviously, was the infinite scroll. Being a small publisher myself, I'm very familiar with the infinite scroll because my web agencies always tell me you have to do infinite scroll because people will stay longer on the site. It's, by the way, true. But it is also the tool that leads us to spending much more time than we would want on sites, in Instagram, and whatever that would be. I think we all know that you open Instagram and 15 minutes later, you have no idea what you actually wanted to do, but you've just lost 15 minutes of your life. Do you think we are too easily falling into these very simple technological traps?
Well, yeah, the film discusses the sort of addiction by design reality of the way that these platforms are designed. You know, a lot of the kids who went on to work for these companies came out of the Stanford BJ Fogg's behavior change lab at Stanford that is all about figuring out how to use your genius and use your insights about human nature to control the way people act. And to control people's habits. And so the film goes into all kinds of different ways that social media has intentionally made itself more more clickbaity, more juicy, more addictive. And one of those ways is by removing stopping cues, because they, you know, their business model is that they're only making money if your eyes are on the screen, and they are able to sort of say to their real customers, the advertisers, yes, we are the people who have the best chance at changing the behavior or manipulating the opinions of our users. We can get them to think and do what you want us to get them to think and do if you pay us. And so, so they need those eyes on the screen in order to show us those ads and get those impressions in front of the most vulnerable audience, the people who are most likely to want that thing, to click on that thing, etc. So, so we did get to talk to Asa Raskin, who invented Infinite Scroll. And one thing he said, I think it's not in the film, but we asked him, do you regret creating Infinite Scroll? And he said, you know, in a way I do, because I think to myself, how many millions of human the lifetime of human beings, like human hours on the scale of millions, have been lost because of Infinite Scroll. So he thinks of it as something that is stealing the hours of our life away from us. And he's the one who made it. But he's also said, on the other hand, if I didn't invent it, someone else would have, which I think gets to the point that there isn't necessarily one bad guy in this story. It is an information ecosystem that, you know, is sort of encouraging all kinds of people to work in this way, to figure out how to get our attention and extract from us and manipulate our behavior. So we think about, you know, what sort of change are we looking for? It would have to be on like the systemic level of re-incentivizing these tech wizards to be creating something other than an extractive platform.
What do you think was there first, the extractive platform or the incentive for these platforms to create such models because they could make more money with it? If you understand what I mean, yeah?
I think I do. You know, so certainly when we think about industrial capitalism is also an extractive economy. And, you know, it's about looking at a forest and saying, I can take those trees and I can turn them into lumber and I can sell that lumber for money. And, you know, mining is an extractive process where we say this thing will have more value if I take it out of its ecosystem, take it out of the earth, and I, you know, do something to it, and I package it as a widget and I sell it. And so certainly the roots of extractive economies have been with us for a few hundred years. And this is just like a new way of doing that, where now, rather than preying upon animals and ecology and the earth to get our resources, we're preying upon each other and humans to get the resource, which is that human futures resource that Shoshana Zuboff lays out in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
At the same time, we are not stopping preying on the nature, right? So if we replace that, maybe it would even be a good thing. The company that produced The Social Dilemma is called Exposure Labs, and it calls itself a film and impact production company. Yeah. So which impact are you trying to generate, and which impact do you believe did The Social Dilemma actually create?
Sure. Yeah, I think So Exposure Labs was founded by the director of Chasing Ice, Chasing Coral, and The Social Dilemma, Jeff Orlowski, and is also headed by Larissa Rhodes, who she's produced the last 2 films, including The Social Dilemma. And so the 2 of them really, with the rest of the creative team involved as well, are looking for stories, looking to sort of uncover truths that we think are important and overlooked. And the same way that our climate change focused film is focusing on something that is an existential threat to humans, if we don't look at and really understand what is going on in the oceans, for example, we might not be able to reverse it in time to keep our ecosystem from collapsing. So that film was really intended to reveal what was actually happening under the waves and happening in coral reef ecosystems, and say, look at this, let's look at this, let's unveil this, so that more people can prioritize finding the solutions. And that's the sort of our same impetus for The Social Dilemma. Jeff did go to Stanford alongside of many of the people who sort of founded a lot of these companies. A lot of his friends ended up working for, Periscope, Twitter, Facebook, Google, Apple. And so it was almost a path that he took, but he got into filmmaking instead. And I think so because of that access, because of his friends in these companies, or his friends that had left these companies, we had really great access to a side of the story of what's really happening at Google and at Facebook and their subsidiaries, that a lot of people don't recognize. And we really did set out to make a film that anybody's mom could watch, and she could start to understand Facebook's not free. Google is not free. Yes, you don't have to pay to have an account. You're paying in another way. You're exchanging your agency and autonomy for the use of the social networking site or the search bar. So I think that's what drives us, is wanting to sort of unveil an issue that's not being looked at carefully enough, and an issue on the level of existential threat. And so, one thing we want to accomplish with the film is we want to help people change the way they use social media. We want designers to change the way they're designing technologies in this area. And we want regulating bodies to think about different ways of more strongly regulating this economy, this extractive business model. We've outlawed other economies before, and it is possible that we need to build some laws to safeguard around this attention economy as well.
How long do you think it would take until this changes? I mean, obviously, The Social Dilemma was an impactful and impressively successful film, but do you think you have changed many behaviors?
I think that societal norms are, what people's behavior is often, I can think about it as like on a seesaw, where more people will do the thing that is easier down here, which might be to sign on and scroll online. But the more that we educate more people, the more people will walk up the hill. And it is harder to live your life and run your company off of these platforms, but it is possible. And the more people that walk up that hill, eventually the seesaw will actually tip quite quickly. And we can get to a tipping point where enough people are disenchanted with the way things are that the changes do happen quite quickly. We've seen that before, as monarchies became a thing of the past, etc. There have been times where there's been major social change that happens in the course of a few years, but of course we have to sort of start having that conversation as a world and as a country and as a community to get the ball rolling. So I really don't know. I mean, I think if everyone put their mind to it, if everyone at these companies started thinking about different ways to monetize, and if everyone in legislative bodies started working on smarter policies, we could change it in a couple years. But I don't know when there will be the political will to make that happen.
There's a question from the audience, from Rick Willard, who that goes into the same direction. He says money alone is the driving incentive. And you also just said we need a different model of monetization. So what he says is money is the driving incentive, and the value should be reimagined and recalibrated, which implies that there's no middle ground in this sense. If there's a middle ground, what is it? So as far as I understand that question, should we maybe, do we have to get away from trying to make money?
You know, I certainly think that there are more worthy incentives than making money. And that's something that, you know, Tristan talks about in the film is we've taken the most powerful artificial intelligence that exists on Earth, that has ever existed, and we've asked it to solve for the problem, which advertisements can we show which vulnerable people, and asked it to solve for the problem of how can I keep this person staring at Instagram or TikTok longer? How can I get more people to sign up for Instagram or TikTok? Like, these are the questions we've asked the most powerful computing machines in the world to answer. That doesn't seem like those questions don't seem worthy of the power of that technology. So, you know, if we could realign incentives to be humane rather than purely driven by money, then I think we could think of much better uses for technology that powerful. Ask it to solve for hunger, ask it to solve for disease. If there should even be that much concentrated power in anyone's hands, but it's certainly not being asked to do the most noble thing right now. And I do think our capitalist system is driving that in a way. So it might take thinking outside the box about what is we need to sort of update our systems across the board, potentially. In emergent ways that we can't necessarily predict or know right now.
Some of the papers that were handed in for the student initiative here at the World Ethical Data Forum were touching that topic too, and one by Christina Varitimidu finished with a question that was, how much are we willing to lose to regain control? Let me rephrase it a bit. Do you think we actually would have to lose anything, ease of staying in touch or convenience or whatever it would be, to regain control of our data? I know I'm asking this someone who is not using Facebook and Instagram anymore, so your answer most likely is no, but what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think we have so much more to gain than we have to lose. If Tristan talks about technologies that are social networks that are aimed at offering people depth and valuable experiences, are aimed at connecting to people so that they go be in the world together, or aimed at telling you about an amazing social justice event happening in your community so that you can go participate in a way that is not moderated and news feed organized by a third party that is trying to manipulate you and trying to get you look at advertisements. So, you know, if venture capitalists all of a sudden were interested in funding that project, there would be people in Silicon Valley who want to work on that project, who want to work on designing humane technology that is a social networking site that is not trying to change who you vote for or change whether or not you vote, that is not willing to, promote propaganda of the state that causes a genocide in Myanmar. The algorithm would not be sort of like designed to hook you in to your lowest, basest instincts of your vanity, your outrage, and sort of the other sort of things that become the top, the most shared content on these platforms. You know, the algorithm has been designed to keep you there. The solution it has arrived at is that it's going to keep you there with outrage and with vanity and with fear and doubt and insecurities. So it figures out your own fears, doubts, and insecurities, and then it shows you material sort of based on that. And instead, we could have an algorithm that was figuring out what our aspirations were and showing us material based on that, or figuring out what was more nuanced content and less salacious content and promoting that. So I do think that there's just like there is a gray area and there is a middle ground where there's a million other things the algorithm could be trying to do. And we could still have social connection, and way more social connection than we're actually getting. I know our director often says the social connection, the social networking platforms, they allow for connectivity, but not connection. So, and there's also a lot of ways to connect using tech that is not mediated by this manipulative algorithm. Like when I text my friend, my phone is not saying, hey, you haven't texted this person in a while. Hey, do you want to text this person? Hey, there's a person down the street. Should you text them? Like I'm choosing, I want to contact my friend about this. And the technology is letting me do that. FaceTime or Zoom, these are platforms that aren't trying to tell me what to do or what to look at. They are just a way for me to connect. So there are other options besides Instagram and Facebook for connecting via technology, and I think they're superior.
Is it a question of autonomy in a certain way then? So, I mean, in the early days, and you said that yourself too, in the early days of social media, we joined Facebook because our friends were there, and we saw these friends in real life. And then suddenly everything changed. I also would say we had a feeling of freedom there at the beginning. There were no borders. There was no, you would always find someone who had the same ideas like you and such things. But I think we've lost that autonomy a long time ago. Or do you think it was a false impression from the very beginning?
No, I don't think it was a false impression. We interviewed a woman named Bailey who was an early Instagram. She was an early employee at Instagram, and she has a great line in the film where she's like, the internet used to be a weird place. It used to be a quirky place. The thing she loved about Instagram before it was monetized, before it was, organized by an algorithm, was that it was a place where you could, if you were really into collecting Austrian stamps, you could find someone else who was really interested in that too. If you had a passion for a certain type of wine from a valley in Oregon, you could find, the vintner of that wine and connect with them. And there's so many ways that you could promoted art and sort of people, quirky people finding their tribe of quirky people. And there are still cases that you can point to today of the ways in which these platforms do allow that, of, someone who's living in a small town America feels like they're super different than everyone else in their small town, can connect with a community that is reflecting their lifestyle or their values or their identity. And that can be really life affirming. I just don't think we should have to trade away our autonomy, like you said, in order to have that kind of connection in technology. It's not, that's a false, it's like a false choice. We should be able to come up with something that allows for us to stay in control of our time and our eyeballs and our beliefs and our information, while also giving us the chance to connect with communities that are maybe far afield. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
I think it did. Yeah. We've touched all the hard topics now. Maybe going more into the story architecture now. Also a question from the audience. How long did it take to come up with the idea of how to visually represent the back end of social media, and what was the process? I mean, it's the outstanding different piece of the film that you had these drama scenes in there. Yeah, how did that happen?
In a lot of different ways. One aspect of it was speaking with Asa and Tristan about, how does it work? How does it really work that how do they pick what to show me, which articles to show me, which content my friends made, and which random things to suggest that I go follow or click or do. And they talked about how each of these companies is building a model of you. They're building a Vickie Curtis model, and they're testing things on that model. So they're using an average of 29,000 data points about how you function online. They're using that to figure out your personality. They're not just taking the data you think they're taking in terms of, it's not just pictures you posted. It's not just things you wrote and posted. It's also your scrolling speed. It's also where you move your mouse around the screen. It's also how much time you stopped and paused and looked at something. It's also what punctuation you use. They can start building out your personality profile based on whether or not you use exclamation marks. So there's tons of information you don't realize you're giving them. And then they're using that to build this little model of you. And then they test stuff against that model. Like, will the model look at this? Does the model like that? And so from there, we came up with this idea that there could be sort of a test room, like a black box room, where we had the algorithms personified as, at one point we were saying one character, then we were thinking 5, we landed on 3. And those characters have different goals. One is trying to grow the platform, more users. One is going after engagement and trying to get you to stay longer. And then the next one is advertising, and he's trying to figure out exactly what ad you need to see at exactly what time in order for it to change your behavior or your beliefs. And so yeah, that's how we came up with this sort of like voodoo doll idea in the model of our main character, Ben, the boy. The model gets to look more and more like Ben over time, to show that sort of the more Ben uses the product, the more accurate they can be to suck him in longer and make him connect with more friends and invite more friends and get their growth and their engagement needs met. And we wanted to do that to sort of show that there's these totally different, completely out of sync goals. Your life goals have nothing to do with the goals of the algorithm. Their goal is just to get this person to click more, right? And that might be completely out of line and misaligned with what you want for your life, but they're radically indifferent about the fact that you're a person who has a life. They don't know that. They're algorithms. So we wanted to really show how indifferent they were to Ben's real life. And we also wanted to show this family of characters that sort of is each affected in a different way, because we were reading story after story about people who had gotten sucked down some sort of YouTube rabbit hole and politically radicalized, joining white supremacy groups, and only to sort of like snap out of it years later and be like, how did that happen to me? And, there are articles in the New York Times about that. We have stories of girls being bullied to the point where they are self-harming and don't want to go to school anymore. These things overlap with racism and sexism in such a way that there is a lot of harm being done, and that it's being amplified by these platforms.
We are really running out of time, and I know they will cut us off in 3 minutes. Okay. So my maybe final question would be, you'd have all these amazing contributors. Do you have a favorite contributor in the film?
Yeah, I gotta say, I loved the way that Shoshana Zuboff outlines. We visited her at her home when we did the interview, and she has a room that's full of research. Literally, it's like the entire wall is covered in banker's boxes that are stacked to the ceiling, full of her research. And I was just, all of the people we interviewed are amazing. I love what Jaron Lanier has to say as well. He's another standout character, I think, like a real original of a person. And I think that Shoshana's work was really impressive to me, and I love to get to include her voice in the film a little. And the book is like huge. It's like 700 pages long, so there's so much we couldn't say, but she's just amazingly thorough at talking about the way this new kind of capitalism was created at Google, and it solved the problem for them. Their VCs were like, when is this going to turn back into money for me? And they were, they for a long time said, we can't do advertising that goes against the ethics of what we stand for. We need to find another way. And eventually they ended up figuring out how to do advertising, and not just do regular advertising, but this super micro targeted advertising as well. And then that transferred over to Facebook. And we have a character, Tim Kendall, who says he remembers working at Facebook, looking at Google, saying, we need to do that. So at the time, it was just thought of as a great solution to the problem of how are these tech boys going to monetize their companies? And now we're seeing that it has all these downstream consequences that include real world harm on the scale of country level distress and disrupted elections and violence against targeted minority groups. And now we're seeing real world harm that makes it seem like maybe it was not the right choice to make. But her work lays out exactly how that all happened, and I think that that's worth reading.
We were granted more time. If you have 5 more minutes, we could go on.
Yeah, I could do another 5.
Cool.
Or
Super.
maybe 2. We'll plan for 2. It'll really be 5.
let's plan for 2. Okay. My final question would then be: now we had the great hack that was going into a similar direction. We had the social dilemma, super successful. Do you think we will see more films coming up that are focusing on, let's say, our cyber lives, so the digital world that we exist in, that is often a parallel world to our real world, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's something we have to look at more critically. And like I said, Exposure Labs wants to make films about something that sort of peels back the curtain and says, what's really going on here? And I think it would be great if that was the case. There is another film called Coded Bias that came out that talks about the inherent racism in these algorithms, in terms of facial recognition technology, and how algorithms have inherited racism from the people who created them, and the algorithms are not particularly good at identifying the faces of people of color. Her film is a great look at a particular way in which trusting this technology too much fails us as a society. And I think we were focusing on saying this advertising business model, this surveillance capitalist business model, is not serving us. It's misaligned with our goals and our humanity, and we need to think about different business models. And we can, right? Like these are very smart people who are creating this stuff. So if we put them on a different task, I do think we could make a change.
We had that question, a similar question there. Now, do you know if the advertisers like the way Facebook, etc., operate, or do they have to go with it because of the audience size?
Yeah.
Advertising myself on Facebook, I would say it's where the audience sits, so that's what you do.
Yeah.
Is it one of the? To me, it's one of the most interesting parts of the whole story that none of these people, nobody who is involved, actually wants to do harm, right? Or wanted to do harm in the beginning. Is that maybe really one of the fascinating elements, that all these little decisions that just wanted to optimize something, make a product better, in the end ended up creating an enormous amount of harm?
I think that with humility, it would have always been seen that this was not perfect, and that this was not working, and that this was going to cause harm. I think that we, get into trouble when a very sort of like monotonal group of individuals who has similar personalities and similar ethnic backgrounds and similar age. And, if you basically have a group of 28-year-old white boys in Silicon Valley, with dominating the space, you are going to miss things. And they missed a lot of things. And I think, so we also need to think about creating this space for other kinds of intelligence to be part of the design process. And I think if we did that, then we would come up with better designs. So, So whilst there was no intention to do harm, there was also some ignorance and some blind spots that were not accounted for. And hopefully in the future, we think about the value of having the diversity of perspective in the room when you're designing something.
Okay, I'm not going to throw in another question because that was a very good final word. With a bit more humility, we could maybe have avoided this. Thank you so much, Vickie, both for the amazing film that you worked on and these 35 minutes with us here today.
Great.
And everybody else, thank you for joining us here. I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the festival.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for everyone for coming and for sort of bringing this issue to the top of mind.